Hello, my name is Lauren. I recently graduated medical school and I am extremely excited to be making this video. The topic I have chosen to discuss, as you may have inferred from the image already present on your screen, is reproductive anatomy, and more specifically to this video, male reproductive anatomy, and I will be making another video on the female structures as well. But I chose reproduction because first and foremost, I find the subject to be very fascinating. It was one of my favorite subjects to study in medical school, and I wanted to share it with you. Second of all, reproductive health is extremely important. It touches every aspect of medicine, even including psychiatric and behavioral health, so it's something important to know. And finally, because there are some students who find this topic to be especially challenging, and because it's a lot of anatomy in a small space, but also because it's a sensitive subject. So I wanted to jump in and help tackle this topic as best as I possibly can. So you can see on the screen, I've already drawn a cross-sectional picture of some of the structures that we're going to talk about today. And I did this mostly because I'm not the world's fastest artist, but it also provides a nice backdrop for our discussion. So starting from the top, this is to be representative of the bladder, which sits directly on top of the prostate gland, which then connects with the penis, and those are the only ones we have so far. But it's important to know that this is a cross-sectional picture, and that's important because most of the structures we're going to talk about today are paired structures, meaning that even though I'm going to only draw one on this side of the body, there's one pretty much identical to it on the other side. So I want you to keep that in your mind, that when we're drawing the testis and we're drawing the vas deferens and a lot of those other structures, that there's actually one on both sides of the body. Now, approaching this topic can be a little bit daunting, but the way I like to think about it is to go from where the sperm is actually produced and follow it all the way through the system until they're ultimately exiting the body. And I feel like this is helpful because when you're trying to recall this information, you don't want to have to try and recall discrete facts and details. You want to be able to move through it in a logical way from A to B all the way to Z. So that being said, we're going to start from the beginning, and I'm going to draw down here a testis. Now the testis is the male gonads. It sits below the pelvis in the scrotum, and it is responsible for the production of sperm, but it also produces testosterone, which is the major male sex hormone. And within the testis, packed into little room-like structures, are these small tubules, and they're called seminiferous tubules, and I'll write that in just a second. But the seminiferous tubules is actually the site where sperm is produced. And the way they're packaged is actually pretty genius because it allows for a large surface area to be crammed in a very small space. And this allows the male body to produce a large amount of sperm each day, on the order of 100 million sperm per day, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now these tubules are ultimately going to sort of drain and coalesce into what's called the reach testes, which is a net-like structure that is found in the testis. And this is actually a very good name because reach actually means net, and this is a very net-like structure. From here, the sperm will drain out through another set of tubules into the next structure that we're going to talk about. Let me grab another color. And this is the epididymis. And the epididymis can be found on the posterior superior aspect of the testis, and it's actually very well named. So the beginning of the word is epi, which means upon, and the second part of the word is didymis, which can be translated into either testicle or, in Greek, twin. So the epididymis is literally upon the testicle or upon the twin. And again, as I said before, there are two testes, one on each side. So another helpful way to remember that we're looking at a cross-sectional picture. So the epididymis, very aptly named. Now the epididymis is important because it helps get sperm from one place to the next, but it also has a very large secretory function, meaning that it secretes compounds that are important for the health of the sperm. And one of those compounds is a glycoprotein that actually inhibits the final step in sperm maturation, which is important because the sperm need to mature at just the right moment for proper fertilization. So it's a very important structure for us to remember. Now the epididymis is ultimately going to release these products into the next structure we're going to learn, which I'm drawing now, which is the vas deferens. And the vas deferens is basically a muscular tube. which is going to transport the sperm out of the scrotum and into the male pelvis, ultimately meeting with the prostate gland. Now, the vas deferens is interesting because it's a structure that has a very common clinical correlation, in that the vas deferens is actually what gets snipped, if you will, when a man goes in for a vasectomy. So they cut the vas deferens and ligate it in such a way that it can't reform, and it's a very important form of birth control. And so that just goes to show how important of a structure the vas deferens is in proper fertilization. So before the vas deferens sort of hits the prostate, it runs into another gland up here. And again, there's two, one on each side. And this gland is called a seminal vesicle. And the seminal vesicle is another important secretory organ in the male reproductive anatomy. And it actually ends up producing approximately 60% of the end ejaculate by volume is from the seminal vesicle. So a lot of secretions come from them. And one of the most important is a secretion that's very high in the sugar fructose. And that actually serves as the energy source for the sperm as they sort of continue on their journey. So it's, again, a really important structure to know about. Now, the next one that we're going to talk about, we already sort of identified it, but I'll write down its name for you, is the prostate. And as the sperm will enter the prostate, it enters through a duct called the ejaculatory duct. And as it goes through the ejaculatory duct, the prostate is also going to secrete material into it. About 20% of the end weight of the ejaculate will come from the prostate. So when the ejaculate is fully formed, only about 10% of it by volume is sperm itself. Now, the next and final structure that we're going to talk about is one that's hopefully a little bit more familiar to you. And it comes down from the bladder and meets up with this ejaculatory duct, and that's the urethra. And as it goes through the prostate, we call it the prostatic urethra. And this is really where the urinary system and the reproductive system meet in the male. And this is also why in older men, when they have hypertrophy or enlargement or growth of the gland, they have trouble with urination. And it's because this urethra runs smack dab in the middle of the prostate, can actually get pinched as the gland grows. And that's when you end up with a condition called benign prostatic hypertrophy, or BPH. And I'm sure you've heard about it in commercials. But that's the anatomical sort of correlation with BPH, is that that urethra runs smack dab right through the prostate. So next, the urethra is going to cross a membranous section with some skeletal muscle and connective tissue, and there it becomes known as the membranous urethra. Now, also in this membrane, there's a small gland called the bulbourethral gland, and that gland is important because it actually produces pre-ejaculate. So from here, the urethra is going to continue and become what we call the penile urethra, because it's going to traverse the penis, and then finally, the sperm is ejaculated out of the body. And so now we've completed sort of our trip from the beginning where the sperm was created to where they ultimately leave the body. Now, when I was first learning this material, I was given a mnemonic to help me remember. And so I'll give that to you guys now. Now, I will warn you it's not the best mnemonic in the world, and I'll explain why later, but it'll help us as we sort of review everything. So the S here is for seminiferous tubule, and that's where the sperm is really created. Then it passes through the rete testes into the epididymis. From the epididymis to the vas deferens, which is the V, where it enters the pelvis, meets with the seminal vesicle, and ultimately puts the sperm into the ejaculatory duct, which is the next E. And here at the end is really where this mnemonic falls apart, because N really doesn't stand for anything. So you can remember that N stands for nothing, if that's helpful. The next structure that the sperm are going to encounter is the urethra, and we talked about the prostatic, membranous, and penile urethra, and then ultimately will exit the body through the penis. So I hope that this lecture was helpful in sort of giving you an idea of the route that sperm takes through the reproductive system and some of the structures. And I will be doing another video on female reproduction as well that I hope you find to be helpful. Thank you.